So thank you guys for coming today to part 2 of our 3-part series on the AE2100A engine on our Saab 2000 aircraft. These are Rolls-Royce engines, and we've already had session 1, which covered the 4 objectives that we would like to accomplish over the course of the next several weeks. So today's section is on the engine modules. There are 5 modules on this aircraft, on this engine, particular engine, and those modules have sub-parts, sub-assemblies, grandchildren you could look at, that have life-limited parts and intervals that need to be tracked in a certain way. So, as you know, our software system has some limitations in regards to how we can possibly track children and grandchildren, and our software system doesn't allow us to track subcomponents, subs of subs, basically. So, in addition to covering how the modules are set up, I'm going to show you how I've set them up in our software tracking system using the handouts and the tools, the 6 tools that we covered in our first session. Those tools include the organizational chart, as well as the modules and intervals breakdown of life limits and some part numbers. So we're going to cover those particular 5 things today. So today's objective, what do we want to get out of this today? We want to successfully describe, be comfortable to describe the 5 modules and their subcomponents using 2 of the 6 tools we spoke about in our first session. Those 2 tools are going to be the organizational chart and the modules and intervals chart or sheet handout that I provided for you in the first week, which was several weeks ago. I do have extra handouts over there on the table. I can see most of you already bought your handouts today. So thank you for bringing them. Thank you for getting the email. And let's get started today. So the first handout that I provided for you during our first session was a layout of what the engine actually looks like. This shows you where the 5 modules are and why they're broken down into subcomponents and what those subcomponents look like. So while you're doing an engine change, or if you want to know why it's set up the way it's set up, if you keep this handout in front of you, it can clearly show you, okay, I get why it's set up the way it's set up. So while doing an engine change, I highly recommend keeping this, at least for your first several, keeping this handout in front of you, as well as the organizational chart, as well as the modules and intervals handout that I've provided for you today, as well as our first session. So here's our organizational chart. It's broken down into 3 parts, color-coded, and how it's set up in our software tracking system. Our software tracking system is limited. It doesn't do subs of subs. So to set up the system or the engine in our software, I had to give the engine more children than it actually had. So what the modules include are those 5 dark blue, as you can see from the organizational chart, 5 dark blue modules. The light blue that you can see are subs or children of the power section, the biggest section of the engine. So those sub-assemblies have intervals and life-limited parts, and because they're life-limited, we have to track them separately. And that's why the engine's set up this way. We will be moving to Flight Docs, a new software system, as you know, and so some of this will change over the next 6 months to a year, but for our purposes of today's training, as well as what you are doing when you're doing a install and a removal, or remove and install, if you follow this organizational chart, you'll understand where the parts are and successfully be able to complete the engine change within the 8-hour time frame that we're hoping that you will be able to do once this training is complete. So, what are the 5 modules? Our first module is the PGB, right? The prop reduction gearbox, or prop gearbox, as referred to in most of the conversation that you hear throughout the office. So our PGB. PGB only has 1 sub, and that sub is important because it's the only hourly tracked life-limited part on the engine. Everything else is cyclic, meaning cycles. But this is the only one that's hours, so you kind of have to watch this one while you're doing an engine change. The other caveat to the prop gearbox is that it's removed from the engine and left on the aircraft most of the time here at Penn Air. So although when we get to the logbook, which will be our next 25-minute training, a little bit longer, when we get to that, it appears that the gearbox as a module should go with the engine, but it actually is the part that attaches the engine to the prop, to the airframe, and the majority of the time we leave the PGB, the prop gearbox, with the airframe. So that'll be a module you'll be moving fairly regularly. And so note that that's kind of an asterisk when we do these engine changes. So the second module is the GMAD, the gearbox mounted accessory drive. This particular module has no subs that we track. There's no life limited parts, but it's an on-condition part, and we want to know the part number, serial number, and how many hours are on it. Because if there's anything on condition that tends to go wrong trend analysis-wise, we want to move this entire module, this entire assembly, off that engine. So we track that separately. Our third section, or third module, is the biggest one of the entire engine. That's our power section. You can look at this power section on the AE2100 engine as the cold section, as you guys refer our cold section to the CT7 on our 340 engines. So this is like kind of the power horse, the big dog. It's got 16 subs on it. 15 of the 16 are life-limited tracked parts. They're moved and replaced regularly when the engine goes to shop visit. So that's something we look at during the return from shop, when we look at the 8130, and again, we'll be covering all of that extensively when we do the 25-minute training, when we go through the logbook, and I'll show you what to look for. The fourth is the torque meter. Torque meter, again, on condition, nothing miraculous there, nothing tracked other than it went on, it came off. And then finally, the power unit accessory drive, the PUAD, and this module doesn't have life limits or intervals, but because we've had some issues with some of the parts on this particular module, we've decided to track 3 of the parts, the main 3 parts in this module, and those are the FPMU, the stator alternator, and the pump lube and scavenge. So those 3 are on condition. They are removed and replaced regularly. Again, just on, off, nothing there other than you need to know that when you see those, they have to be removed and replaced and tracked. So let's break down each one of these. So first is the prop gearbox. This is the one part that's at hourly on the entire engine. And it's the one that you need to make sure, because this moves, prop gearbox moves very regularly. It's a 20,000 hour limit, and it's the only one. The GMAD doesn't have any subs. So again, that's the on-condition one. So then we got the power section. The power section is the big one. That's the one we got to talk about today mostly. It's got 4 subs, 4 sub-assemblies, the compressor rotor, the power turbine assembly, the HP or GG gas generator, and the power turbine rotor. So some of those have tracked, some of them don't, but those are going to be the light blue in your organizational chart that we've already looked at. So when you look back at that organizational chart, the dark blue would be the power section. These 4 are going to be that light blue on the left-hand side of that organizational chart. So when we look at the compressor rotor, that's the big one. That's got the 16 parts on it. 15 are tracked. One of them is an on-condition, and that's your anti-ice bleed valve. The anti-ice bleed valve is tracked because through trend analysis, we've realized that we go through a lot of these. And if we go through a lot of these, then we want the vendor to explain, why are we going through all these when they should be lasting longer? Why are they lasting longer from one vendor versus another vendor? So the anti-ice, and you'll see, again, same as the CT7, the 340 engine, we've replaced many of these many times. And then you've got your HP or your GG, your gas generator. The gas generator has 3 things that we track. We track a spacer between the first and second stage, and then we track the first wheel or rotor, which Depending on which logbook you're looking at, the terminology could be wheel, could be rotor, but know that it's one and the same. And then the second. And then you've got your power turbine rotor, nothing there that we track, which we've already covered. And then your power turbine assembly. That also has 3 things that we track. One, again, a spacer between the third and fourth, and then the third rotor or wheel, and the fourth rotor or wheel. So torque meter, again, we've already covered. There's nothing we track there on condition. We want to know when it went on and when it went off. And then you've got your PUAD. This is the one that has 3 on-condition parts based on trend analysis that we want to track. Your FPMU, your pump, lube, and scavenge, and your stator alternator. All on condition, all tracked through the logbook. We'll show you where to pull those on and off in the logbook at our next 25-minute training. So finally, I did give you guys instructions on a quiz last session. So there were 6 tools that we covered in a successful engine change. I've given you guys all the quiz, which is right there. I'm going to let you guys take that quiz back to your desks. I would love for you to bring that quiz to me before our next session so that we can cover whether you know where to find these things and to be able to successfully complete the engine change. So do you guys have any questions? Yeah.